Brought to you by Moonbeam Multimedia.
This is 16 to 1, a podcast about education, teaching, and learning.
I think I'm going to write a letter
Okay.
about the spring forward.
To whom?
Who is it? Who did this? The Senate?
Maybe.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good place to start.
Okay. Good morning.
Good morning.
Hello.
On this daylight savings.
On this
day.
daylight savings, of which we've already lost an hour.
Yeah, we're recording on the day when we lost an hour. And I kind of forgot that it was today, and I woke up pretty mad that I had lost an hour whilst sleeping.
I'm mad too.
Okay.
It hit me and I was like, no. Also, there was snow on the ground, which really peeved me.
Yeah.
So anyways, hello and welcome.
Hi. Welcome back to 16 to 1.
We've got part 2 coming for you
We do.
today.
We just couldn't fit all of those thrilling Supreme Court cases into one episode.
Thrilling. I'm sure that we could do part 10 of
Yeah.
this eventually. Maybe we'll keep adding.
I think Katie is running out of patience with me for this topic, though, so this will be the last, at least for now.
For a while.
Yeah.
Let's do something a little lighter
Okay.
next episode.
Okay. We
It's
can do
probably
that.
not lighter.
I think it is.
Okay.
I think what's coming up is lighter.
So we've already lost an hour. Let's just jump right into it.
Okay, let's get started with our headline roundup for this week. What is going on in education news around the world?
Here
Hold
we
on.
go. Liberty University, a large evangelical Christian university in Virginia, was fined a hefty $14 million fine by the U.S. Department of Education.
Yeah.
Yikes. Okay. This fine stemmed from the university's failure to comply with the Clery Act, a federal law regarding campus safety. So the Department of Ed found Liberty had a couple of issues. The first one, they had misreported crime data. They failed to accurately report crimes that happened on campus, which would obviously maybe downplay potential safety concerns. And the other one was the treatment of sexual assault survivors. If you've heard anything about Liberty, it's probably about this. Liberty was accused of mishandling cases of sexual assault on campus, including discouraging victims from coming forward and not providing them proper support. This $14 million fine is the biggest ever levied for Clery Act violations. Liberty did acknowledge some of the violations and has committed to making changes to comply with this act. However, they also maintained that they were unfairly targeted.
Yeah. When I was reading the news about this, all I heard was statements coming from them. It's like, why are you picking on us and not all these other people?
Yeah, which is not really a great attempt at innocence.
Yes, they were trying to make the case that they were being targeted for their religious affiliation.
Okay.
So, anyway.
Well, I have somehow landed into Liberty University TikTok about the sexual assault issues and reporting and all of that.
It's been going on for quite a while.
Yeah.
It's a deeply ingrained cultural issue from what I can tell.
Me too.
Yeah.
To be fair, I'm getting some information from TikTok, so take that for what you will.
Sure.
But there seems to be some growing issues with that. So,
okay. Second story. This is from Greece. Lawmakers in Greece's parliament have voted effectively to end a state monopoly on university education amid protests and demonstrations in central Athens that drew more than 18,000 people, a lot of student demonstrators and stuff. A bill was narrowly passed in parliament that would allow foreign private universities to establish branches within Greece and for degrees granted by these universities to be considered on par with those granted by Greece's public universities. A measure that the center-right government argued would help reverse the exodus of up to about 40,000 Greek university students choose to study abroad every year. So this is ostensibly to give students in Greece more choice of university. Greece also, I was looking up, has historically spent less on public education than other European counterparts. So this is pretty complicated. I did not know that the university system in Greece worked this way.
I didn't
it was
either.
Almost all public education. So as you can imagine, the more left-leaning contingent in Greece is not too happy about this, but I also saw that opinion polls in Greece suggested that a lot of people did want this change. So, yeah, I'm just curious to see how it goes. Basically, it's just like private universities from elsewhere in Europe and even in the US now can kind of set up shop. It's going to be tricky to determine whether that's going to be a net positive for Greece. I'm not sure how...
We shall see.
How the revenue situation works for universities there. I think it was saying that these foreign entities could now set up with like a non-profit status and operate within Greece. So
really?
Yeah. Some of the protests turn kind of violent at a certain point because there's like an offshoot of demonstrators there. But most of the protests that were happening during the weeks leading up to this were nonviolent. There's a lot of student demonstrators. And anyway, that's what's going on in Greece.
Okay, Greece.
All right. Take us back to the U.S., would you?
Nebraska's State Board of Education has voted 5-3 against a rule change process that would have enabled the defining and banning of sexually explicit books and materials from school libraries and removed a requirement for schools to purchase a minimum number of new books each academic year. So this charge is being led by an activist Board of Education member named Kirk Penner, who in January said that he thought his measure would fail and that he hoped this would lead voters to elect more conservative members of the State Board of Ed in the future. And that was according to a story in the Nebraska Examiner.
Yeah, and we'll put that in the show notes too.
So at issue in the ruling was local control. Those voting against the rule change argued that the content of school libraries should be left up to local districts and school boards rather than the state.
Yeah, I've seen a concerning trend with conversations around this and book banning a lot, and we've talked about it before, but there's a tendency to use the word porn and the word sexually explicit interchangeably as if they are the same thing.
And they're not.
It's deeply concerning to me because there are a lot of books that depict sex because human beings procreate that way, and therefore it makes its way into the human story. Sexually explicit content is not the same thing as porn, and it is deeply concerning to me that those things get swapped in as if they're the same thing, because they are not the same thing. No. And a lot of activists have pointed out that if your dragnet is supposed to be catching any sexually explicit material, you're going to catch a lot of books in there that you probably do not want to remove from your school libraries.
Right. It's such a weird thing.
Yeah.
It's such a weird thing.
It sure is.
Like, if you don't want to read books that have... I don't even like using that phrase because it's so loaded.
Sexually explicit?
Yeah, it's so loaded. Then don't. But maybe don't prevent other people from reading a book.
Well, that's actually what was going on with this Nebraska case. I think a lot of the board members said that they did not support sexually explicit material being used in schools, but that they said that any local school district or some parent in some local school district should not get to determine for the entire state what content can be permitted or not permitted in school libraries. Sure. It's different from the question of whether or not these materials should be removed in the first place. And anyway,
Okay. Well,
there you have it.
We'll follow up on Nebraska maybe. Part 2. These people.
Our Supreme Court case roundup. These are
people.
Again, we're kind of discussing cases that have had a major impact on education in the United States. And we're starting in 1988 this week. Would you like to do this one?
Okay. We have the Hazelwood School District versus Kuhlmeier. This case limited student press freedom, allowing schools to restrict student speech in school-sponsored publications if their censorship is reasonably related to a legitimate pedagogical concern. This really hits close to home. So this case centered around a censorship issue in the Hazelwood East High School newspaper, which is called The Spectrum. And it was written and edited by students in St. Louis County, Missouri, as part of their journalism classes. So in May of 1983, the principal, Robert E. Reynolds, received proofs of the paper's May edition and decided to withhold 2 articles from publication, one on teen pregnancy, containing conversations with 3 students who had been pregnant, and another on divorce, which contained an interview with a child whose parents were divorced.
Divorce, okay.
1988. Okay. These things were happening. Okay, sure. We'll be mad. Okay. Yeah. So the student editor, Kathy Kuhlmeier, and 2 other students sued, arguing that their First Amendment rights were violated. So since the precedent of the Tinker versus Des Moines case,
which we talked about last episode,
courts often sided with students in freedom of expression cases unless schools could prove that student expression caused substantial disruption to school activities. However, the 1980s represented something of a winding down of the student protest era of the 60s and 70s and a movement by school administrators to reassert authority. So the Supreme Court sided with the school district in a 5-3 decision. In the majority opinion, written by Associate Justice Byron White, the court determined that the school hadn't intended the paper to be a public forum, but rather a limited forum, overseen and regulated by school officials. Therefore, school officials could censor content that they deemed inappropriate as long as their reasons were reasonably related to legitimate pedagogical concerns. I hate this one.
Yeah, this one's a little close to home for you as the media person at your school, right?
These are these stories that are important for students because in the 80s, students were getting pregnant, and in the 80s, people were getting divorced. And like some kids probably could have felt seen and validated by reading stories similar to their own. And I hate that.
So I had a couple of questions about this case, and I'll actually skip to the second one first. Should the content of student speech be judged differently based on the topic? It seems like what was really at issue here was the content of the articles. Like, let's not talk about teen pregnancy. Let's not talk about divorce because those topics are uncouth. I tried to find the articles, and I couldn't. The ones that got
I would have loved to have seen it.
Yeah, because I want to know how there's legitimate pedagogical concern to curtail student free speech. How is there some pedagogical concern that some supposedly renders these thoughts from students not worthy of being published? That's the one question I have. And then the other question is like whether or not this decision strikes the right balance between free speech and school authority. A lot of this kind of hinges on the idea of whether or not the paper is a public forum. I struggle with this one because I think I think I could understand a reasonable argument that says that, well, this is a class that students have to take. There are certain requirements. There are like restrictions on it. It's not public in the same way that like writing in a letter to the editor is public forum or whatever. But I have a lot of concerns because this gives schools and administrators a lot of leeway to determine what is and isn't pedagogically appropriate. And as we are seeing time and time again, there's often disagreement about that. And I'm not really sure how to give anybody the authority to decide what is and isn't appropriate in that way.
I'm frustrated.
Yeah. All right. Next case, Safford Unified School District versus Reading. I remember this one when it happened.
Me too.
This was from 2009. It was a Supreme Court case that centered on student privacy and the limitations of school staff searching students. So this involved a 13-year-old student, an 8th grader named Savannah Redding. She was accused of bringing prescription-strength ibuprofen to school in violation of a school policy. This story was very complicated. It seems like this girl might have lent a classmate her folder, and then the classmate was maybe distributing pills somehow, and then the classmate maybe said that it was actually Savannah's pills, but it wasn't really. Anyway, there's a he said, she said. Yeah. But they're kids and they're lying, trying to cover for themselves. So anyway.
Yeah, they're 13-year-olds.
Yeah, they're 13. So Savannah Redding, somebody says she has a prescription that she shouldn't have at school. School officials searched her belongings and then couldn't find the pills, and so they conducted a strip search, and they had her expose her privates in school to try to find ibuprofen. Yep. Savannah Redding's mother sued the school district and school officials responsible for the search, alleging that Savannah's Fourth Amendment right to be free of unreasonable search and seizure was violated, which if someone did that to a kid of mine, I would feel similarly.
I would that would be yes.
So the Supreme Court sided with Redding in an 8-1 decision. Court determined that the strip search was a highly intrusive act and unreasonable in the context of the situation. There was no imminent danger or evidence strong enough to warrant such a search. This case established stricter limits on the extent to which schools can search students. Strip searches are generally prohibited unless there's a probable cause and a warrant or exceptional circumstances with a high likelihood of finding weapons or drugs.
Okay.
I was reading
the Supreme Court got this one right.
Yeah, I was reading the details of this one, and it made me kind of mad. Like, I can't imagine feeling violated in the way this student must have felt violated. And it is a tricky one because you want to maintain safety in a school environment. But golly, it just gave me the heebie-jeebies to read how this search was conducted.
Yeah. Frustrating.
Okay.
All right.
Next one.
2020. This is the Espinoza versus Montana Department of Revenue. This case ruled that states cannot discriminate against religious schools in a scholarship program, and that obviously raised concerns about the separation of church and state. So what happened was Montana established a scholarship program that helped parents afford private school tuition, and it allowed those that donated to the program to receive tax credits for their donations. But as part of the program, the state didn't allow for any religious school students to receive the scholarship. But they did allow for students of non-religious based private schools to receive the scholarship. And so because of that decision, parents argued that the state was discriminating against the religious schools and therefore violating the First Amendment. So originally, the state trial court voted with the parents saying that it was discrimination. And then, this is so weird, then the Montana Supreme Court reversed that ruling and said the entire program was invalid because it included religious options for parents. So they voided the law in its entirety.
Interesting.
So then the case was appealed to the Supreme Court, where they ruled in favor of the parents. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg wrote the dissent and stated that because the law had been completely voided, it did not discriminate against anyone because it did not exist.
Okay.
The middle court decided it was completely void because it couldn't function because it was illegal, essentially.
Illegal.
Yes. And then it still went to the Supreme Court, and then the Supreme Court ruled with the parents, but it really didn't matter because it didn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
So I just love Ruth Bader Ginsburg being like, it's not discriminating because it doesn't exist. Hot take.
Okay.
Montana now has had to rework these programs, obviously, because the entire thing fell apart after this case.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ready to tackle Kennedy versus Bremerton?
You know
This is a pretty recent case from 2022. It made national headlines. Isn't this the guy... so Kennedy is a high school football coach. Isn't this the guy who just resigned not that long ago?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get into it. Joseph Kennedy, high school football coach. He engages in prayer with a number of students during and after high school football games. He likes to do it at the 50-yard line. He likes to be very public about this expression.
It's optional.
Yeah.
He says.
So his employer, the Bremerton School District, asked that he discontinue the practice in order to protect the school from a lawsuit based on violation of the Establishment Clause. We were talking in last episode about what exactly is coercion in these cases. When do you feel like something really is optional? If you're a student at a school district, when do you feel like an instruction, basically, that's being given to you by an adult is optional or not?
Well, and one of the issues that this school had with asking him to stop was because they viewed the time that he was using to pray as a time he was supposed to be in charge of students. That was like part of the argument from them, is that he was actively responsible for these students, and so this should not be happening because he is, right before a game, right after a game, whatever. So that was part of their argument, was basically like, you're not doing what you should be doing as a coach because you're leading this prayer.
Yeah. They got into some trouble, though, as we will see, for that position.
Yes.
So anyway, the school asks him to stop because they don't want to get sued for an Establishment Clause violation. Kennedy refuses and instead rallies local and national media coverage, basically, to kind of get a groundswell of support behind him. So Kennedy then sues the school district for violating his rights under the First Amendment and Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The district court held that because the school district suspended him solely because of the risk of constitutional liability associated with his religious conduct, its actions were justified. Kennedy appealed, and the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit affirmed. So then it goes to the Supreme Court, and Justice Neil Gorsuch, writing for the majority, said that the prayers of the coach, Joseph Kennedy, were protected by the First Amendment and that the school district had erred in suspending him after he refused to end the practice. The ACLU produced a statement on this decision. It said, "This decision is deeply disappointing and undermines the religious liberty of public school students. As the Supreme Court recognized over 60 years ago, it's inherently coercive for school officials to pray with students while on duty. And that's the while on duty part is what you were talking about.
Yeah.
Today's ruling ignores that basic principle and tramples the religious freedom of students who may not share the preferred faith of their coaches and teachers. Essentially, Kennedy ended up getting his job back and then coached one more game and then quit to, I think he said that it was to help an ailing family member out of state. And I read this statement. He said he believes that he can best continue to advocate for constitutional freedom and religious liberty by working from outside the school system.
Yeah. So basically, he got his job back, coached for one game of like a 14 or 15 week season, and then left his players high and dry.
I can tell how you feel about him.
Can you tell I was a former coach?
I don't love how he treated his team as a
right.
Like a flashpoint for political advocacy.
If you're here for the kids, be here for the kids. Like, not that your faith can't be important to you, but don't do that to them. I don't know. That's the hard part for me. That's where I get frustrated as a teacher is like, you probably let those kids down. You left them after week 1. I don't know. He was making a point and he made it.
Well, it's the same question that we were talking about last week. The Supreme Court obviously disagreed that this is the same situation that we talked about last week with the school district in New York, writing a prayer that was supposedly optional to be said during morning exercises, right?
Yeah.
This is a very similar case to me, and I have the same questions that I had last time. When is something like that, when is a religious expression in a public venue coercive?
Yeah.
Versus voluntary, versus whatever? Where's the line drawn between private religious practice and you're a public official making a public declaration of religion?
Yeah.
I think it just bugs me because, I'm a Christian and I feel that my religion tells me that I shouldn't be making public prayers that draw attention to me anyway, because that's something that my religion kind of, says not to do, actually. Which you can't really argue a constitutional case with the guy on that grounds, but you can say, hey, maybe you're not quite understanding the spirit of prayer. Anyway, all I can say about it is that I know that as a student, when there was prayer going on, it felt like I was supposed to be participating in it.
Sure.
That's what's at issue, as much as this guy's right to religious expression is the right to the religious expression or not of all of the students under his care and fellow staff and whomever.
Yeah. Also, if you love coaching that much and you want to share your faith, go coach at a religious school that aligns with you.
Religious freedom isn't only for the people of one religious persuasion.
Anyways.
Yep. Okay. And then our last case, extremely recent. This one is called Students for Fair Admissions, Inc. versus President and Fellows of Harvard College. This case dealt with race-based admissions policies, generally speaking. I think it was the University of North Carolina, I think, was also caught up.
Oh, yeah,
but they ended up separating the cases for some reason.
We did that actually in one of our previous episodes.
I think we did, yeah. So this case centered on whether or not Harvard College's admissions process, which considered race as one of several factors, alongside others, violated Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. Students for Fair Admissions it's a nonprofit legal advocacy group founded by conservative activist Edward Blum for the purpose of challenging affirmative action admissions policies at schools. And so this organization argued that Harvard College, their admissions policy discriminated against Asian American applicants. In a 6-3 decision, the Supreme Court sided with Students for Fair Admissions. Chief Justice Roberts' majority opinion concluded Harvard's admissions process violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. The court found that while diversity is a compelling interest, Harvard's program wasn't narrowly tailored enough to achieve it without undue harm to certain racial groups. In the court's majority opinion, John Roberts wrote, "Nothing in this opinion should be construed as prohibiting universities from considering an applicant's discussion of how race affected his or her life, be it through discrimination, inspiration, or otherwise, but also that courts may not license separating students on the basis of race without an exceedingly persuasive justification that is measurable and concrete enough to permit judicial review. And also, eliminating racial discrimination means eliminating all of it." This ruling overturned 45 years of legal precedent, forcing many schools that may have relied on race-conscious admissions policies to find other ways to pursue their diversity goals. Harvard ended up changing its application in the wake of the ruling. It was kind of interesting how they changed it. Apparently, there was a long optional essay response where students could write about basically anything they wanted to write about. And now they have this very narrowly defined like series of 5 short answer responses. And one of them was kind of interesting. It was like, Harvard values a diverse student body. Can you speak to how you're going to contribute to a diverse student body at Harvard? This is exactly what happened in that previous case too, where it's like, well, we can consider it kind of, sort of, but you can't separate students based on race. You can involve their thoughts about how their race might have impacted them. It's just such a fine line, and I don't know how you parse it.
I don't either. I like the idea of writing to your experiences.
Yeah.
And how that could, I think there's something to
the
be said for
applicant
that.
can still discuss how race affected their life. My questions I have about this case are, does this Students for Fair Admissions decision weaken or strengthen Civil Rights Act protections against racial discrimination?
Can't tell.
Is any kind of race consciousness, it ends up getting equated with discrimination.
Yeah. That's a slippery slope.
I think if I had to sum up the issue with this case, it's that we are a country that is very much trying to correct racial wrongs. We are trying to undo deeply ingrained patterns, social patterns, economic patterns. We are trying to acknowledge a history where we have disadvantaged certain people because of their race. We are not at the point where we can say we are past racial hate. We cannot say that we're past the point where race makes a difference in the day-to-day lives of our citizens. We are not past that point. And yet, we've undermined the very mechanism that we have legally to protect against discrimination. I don't see how we see our way out of that. If we're not willing to acknowledge that racial differences do still exist at a societal, governmental, legal level, we still have these things baked into the way our society functions. I don't see how we make progress.
I'm sure there'll be more on that.
Oh, yeah. We're going to be seeing the fallout from that for decades to come in college admissions practices, I'm sure.
Probably more schools and more cases similar, so that will probably keep evolving.
I wonder what Roberts thinks is an exceedingly persuasive justification for separating students based on race. If Harvard can't make the case of an exceedingly persuasive justification,
what school can? Yeah.
It's interesting to me how many of these cases have directly impacted you in your classroom, even in the time that I have known you. You've definitely dealt with student freedom of expression, ran the newspaper for a while. Yep. You've dealt with what is disruptive in your classroom. You deal every day with helping students apply to college and navigate all of those
questioning
questions.
Books, banning books.
Yep, book banning, all kinds of stuff.
Things, yeah. I'm just collecting them all. It's the worst Pokemon deck of all time.
Do you feel better prepared or less prepared to confront these questions in your classroom now that we have reviewed these cases?
Less prepared.
Yeah, this is one of those.
It's because I don't trust the court to hold up anything that was once decided. Part of that coaches, they're praying. The court's decision on that had reversed like 60 years of them voting the other way.
Yeah, I mean, I'm of two minds about that because I also think that, for example, Plessy, sometimes overturning precedent is a good thing, and courts should be partners in the evolving meaning of the law.
I agree with that. I think the one I'm thinking of is like the Redding case. I don't want them going back on that. Like my kids shouldn't be strip searched for medicine. Yeah. Those are the things that I have a fear of. Of course, I want the court to grow and evolve and change as America changes. But I don't know that the current court is a progressive America that I'm excited for.
Sure.
That's my statement. Is that fair?
Yeah. We're in an era where there's a lot of overturning of precedent happening. It feels like there's a moving target, and it feels like the rug can be pulled out from underneath you at a moment's notice. Yep. This is a lot for educators to know how to navigate.
Yeah, I don't have time to read court briefings. But I want my kids to be well represented and cared for, and I want to ensure that their rights are seen.
Are we ready to move on to fill in the blank?
Yeah. So last episode's question, we
Yes.
released the last episode on Leap Day. So here we go. So every 4 years, we have February 29th. But in 1712, there's one country that had February 30th.
Mm-hmm.
They had gone from the Julian calendar to the Gregorian and then returned to the Julian. And these switches created quite the issue. One that could be partially resolved by adding an extra day in February, making it February 30th. So what country was that? And it was Sweden. And in 1753, Sweden switched to the Gregorian for good, and the calendar was so far off that they had to go from February 17th to March 1st. And those people were just beyond angry that they had lost 11 days of their lives.
Yeah, what happened to everybody with a birthday between February 17th and March 1st?
That year you didn't have it. I bet everybody born that day was born March 1st or whatever.
Yeah, it's just weird.
There's just nobody born in 1753 on February 19th, you know?
Guess so.
All right, what you got this episode?
This episode's question, as we wrap up our second episode on Supreme Court cases, we have a question kind of relevant to that. Who was the longest serving justice in the U.S. Supreme Court? This justice served for 36 years, 7 months, and 8 days. Also, a fun fact related to the court, and that was just about compensation. That's Chief Justice Roberts makes $312,200 a year, and the associate justices make $298,500 a year.
Yeah.
So anyway, who is the longest serving justice of the Supreme Court? 36
Nice.
years, 7 months, 8 days. That's a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, tell me what you learned.
I'm going to go first because mine's a little bit depressing.
Great.
But I'm a NASA nerd. I fell down a rabbit hole about the Columbia disaster, what NASA knew and when. And I did not realize this, but I learned that they knew that that chunk of foam that broke off of the fuel tank and hit the wing, they knew it had happened. They beamed up footage of it happening to the crew on Columbia when they were in orbit and said, we're not worried about this, but we just wanted to let you know that it happened. And this had happened many times before, and they had kind of underestimated the impact of it. NASA was aware. I thought they kind of just like had no idea and it caught everybody by surprise, and that's why the
When they
disaster
came
happened.
back?
Yeah. So the
Okay.
issue happened on reentry because the wing had been damaged at this like critical juncture where the foam broke off and hit it. But it had happened before, like many times. They had stuff like debris
Okay.
hit the and it's going very, very fast when this happens. That's part
Sure.
of the issue. But yeah, I didn't know that. And they also apparently, ground crew, they had a discussion like, if there's a problem, do we tell them? Because there's going to be no way to save them, and they're just going to sit up there being miserable, waiting for their oxygen to wear out. So should we just not tell them if we think that somebody apparently in the ground crew was like, well, I wouldn't want to know, so maybe we should just not tell them if this ever happens.
I wouldn't want to know either. Don't tell me.
In the aftermath of the disaster, there was a lot of conversation about like, well, what would we have been able to do? What could we have done differently? Could we have mounted a rescue mission? And I also learned that like mounting a rescue mission probably would have involved a new shuttle that hadn't launched yet, maybe, and like Columbia docking with the ISS and like transferring astronauts into like a shuttle that wasn't designed to carry that many people. It was a whole thing, but I didn't know that.
Wow.
It had even been acknowledged or discussed that chunk of foam had broken off. And yeah, apparently they communicated with the astronauts and were like, oh, this happened, but
By the
we're
way,
not, it's cool. We're not worried about it.
Don't worry. Just
anyway,
worry. Only worry.
That's what I learned.
Be worried.
What did you learn?
Well, all right. Our friend Risha, who we interviewed, was in Texas, and so she taught me this actually. The word buckaroo.
Buckaroo?
Buckaroo, where it comes from. Okay, so essentially, this is information that I confirmed with the American Heritage Dictionary of the English Language.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Basically, what happens is that as English speakers in the United States start to venture out into the American Southwest, right?
Yeah.
In Spanish, they would use the word vaquero, which is a man who deals with cows, right? Cowboy.
Like a
Vaquero.
cowpoke.
Vaquero. But they would say the V is a B. As these English-speaking people started moving out and working with people who spoke Spanish, they heard vaquero And over time, it just sort of transformed into buckaroo.
Aha.
So from bucero to buckaroo. It's not actually really that far off. And so we really see in California that this word was anglicized. That's kind of how we got the word buckaroo.
Huh. I don't often say buckaroo, but now when I do, I'll know where it came from.
It doesn't come up often, but it is a fun word.
It is a fun word.
Bucero, buckaroo.
Interesting.
Someday you'll get a Jeopardy question correct from it.
I sure will.
And you'll remember this moment.
Any final thoughts as we leave the Supreme Court cases behind?
You know what? We'll see you next episode.
Okay.
It'll be a little less dense.
It will be. It'll be more fun.
Ooh.
Should we tease it?
I don't know. Do we want to? Well, let's just say, make sure you bring out your cardigans for the next episode.
Won't you be our neighbor?
If you just got excited, that's Taylor Swift. I'm sorry, it's not Taylor Swift. This is the original cardigan.
I'll talk to you in 2 weeks.
Bye.
Bye. Hey listeners, thanks for supporting 16 to 1. We're your co-hosts. I'm Chelsea Adams.
And I'm Katie Day. Find our show notes, archives, and resources, sign up for our newsletter, or get in touch with us via the contact form at 16to1.com, all spelled out.
We are so grateful for our listener support. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing to the show and telling your friends or colleagues about it.
The show is edited and produced by you, Chelsea Adams, and you're also responsible for our show's music.
And you, Katie Day, serve as lead researcher and social media manager.
Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you next show. My coworker Allison, who was featured in one of our episodes, she does this hilarious thing where she's like, that's a dumb hill. Like, Allison will just be like, these are stupid hills, and this is a stupid hill to me. Like, just identifying a dumb hill to die on, right? Like, we all want to die on good hills, and there are hills worth fighting for, right, to maintain. But, like, this is a dumb hill.